can lead to mistakes in identifying the true suspect.
Mr. Carter, I will allow the photograph of your truck to be presented to the jury. It is important that all evidence relevant to the case be considered carefully. Please ensure the photograph is properly displayed for the jury's examination. Jurors, take a close look at the photograph, and keep in mind the points Mr. Carter has made about the description of the vehicle in question.
As you can see, my truck isn't a single shade of gray. It's a combination of gray, blue, and black. But now take a closer look at what's next to my truck in this photo. Do you see it? Another gray truck, right next to mine. This is important. If we're going to rely on the witness testimony about the color of the truck, we need to understand how easily something like this can be confused. It's not just my truck that fits the description. There's another truck, right there in the photo, that could have been the one the witness saw. And remember, Opalin's description of a gray truck was vague. She couldn't even say for sure if it was black or gray. This is why we have to be careful with eyewitness accounts. They aren't always as clear or reliable as we'd like to believe. This photo, Carter, shows that multiple vehicles in the area could fit her description, and it raises a serious question about whether or not she was actually describing my truck at all. Your Honor, I would like to request that this article on the challenges of recovering fingerprints from the neck area be entered into evidence. It outlines the difficulties forensic investigators face, particularly in terms of texture variation, moisture content, and post-mortem changes that can affect the quality of fingerprints. This article provides a detailed explanation as to why the fingerprint found on Detective Jones's neck should be treated with caution and skepticism. It underscores the issues with reliability, especially when it comes to prints from an area of the body that is difficult to capture clear, definitive evidence from. I believe it will serve to strengthen my argument that the evidence presented by the prosecution is not as solid as they claim it to be.
Mr. Carter, I will allow the article to be entered into evidence. It provides important context regarding the challenges of recovering fingerprints from the neck area, and it is relevant to the issues raised in your defense.
Now that this article is part of the record, I ask that you, the jury, keep these challenges in mind as you evaluate the forensic evidence presented by the prosecution. As I mentioned earlier, recovering fingerprints from the neck area is fraught with difficulties. The texture of the skin, the moisture, the oils, these factors all contribute to the unreliability of any prints found there. When you consider the fingerprint evidence in this case, I urge you to remember that it's not as straightforward as the prosecution would have you believe. This article highlights exactly why we should approach such evidence with caution and skepticism. The conditions of the neck area make it highly unlikely that the print recovered there could be a definitive link to the crime, and the possibility of contamination or misinterpretation should be fully considered. I understand that this case is emotional. I understand that Detective Jones's death is tragic and that it's difficult to separate our feelings from the facts. But you, the jury, are here to seek the truth, not to make assumptions. It's not enough to take what the prosecution says at face value. You need to look at all the evidence, the full picture, and ask yourselves, is this enough to convict me? I stand here today, accused of a crime I didn't commit. And what I'm asking from you is to do your job, to look at the evidence, to look at the inconsistencies, to listen to the testimony, and to make a fair decision. I trust that when you do, you'll see that the prosecution's case falls apart, and you'll find me not guilty of the charges against me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. With the presentation of evidence now complete, we will proceed to closing arguments. Prosecution, you may present your closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Carter has spent a lot of time pointing out the lack of evidence and the inconsistencies. But what Mr. Carter has not done is spent any time countering with an explanation of where he was the night Detective Jones was murdered. He has not provided witness accounts of where he was that night. In fact, he has not presented a witness who has vouched for him in any way. Please know, I nor the police department believe Mr. Carter is dumb, as he stated earlier. No, we know him to be quite intelligent and cunning. However, his strongest argument today has been to point out conjecture, assumption, and what-ifs which, and I remind you that is not proof. Points again to the DNA test, that is proof. Officer Jones entered his apartment, without him being aware, and this infuriated him. It is not a stretch to imagine the temper this man has and has exhibited many times openly. He was angry. How dare this officer of the law, impeded on his turf, how dare she secure anything that might bring him into a bad light? He was angry she had done this, and this is why he murdered Det Jones. He mentions the DNA under her nails, but fails to elaborate on the fingerprint on her neck. And why is that? Because he cannot explain that other than to point fingers at everyone else, hoping to take attention off of him. A fingerprint to her neck.
Mr. Dallas Carter's fingerprint, ladies and gentlemen. How? And why? Would it be there? Because he murdered her, enraged that she had the audacity to enter his apartment. Now, it was dark that night, the witness states that. He also states the color of the truck, could be gray, black, dark blue. It's dark and completely understandable that the exact shade is not certain. Not to mention, perhaps Mr. Carter procured a different truck to make the disposal of the detective's body. Also, not completely told as the witness states by Mr. Carter, the package she saw him throw into the water was oblong. Long. Like a body. And coincidentally, this oblong body-shaped package has not been recovered. However, the body of Detective Jones has been, right there. On the beach. Coincidence? I don't think so. So, let's stick to the facts, not the conjecture or assumption. Officer Jones entered Mr. Carter's apartment without his knowledge. This angered him. Past crimes and current history shows this is his temperament. A witness sees a man with a truck very similar to Mr. Carter's at the water, throwing an oblong package into the water. And subsequently, a body is found on the beach, a body of an oblong shape. Results at the autopsy show DNA that belongs to Mr. Carter, a thumbprint on her neck. But he can't explain or won't even address that fact. We have facts, we have cause, and we have evidence in those lab results. And the cause of death? Strangulation. That is why he does not want to talk about that thumbprint, ladies and gentlemen. We are not offering assumptions, conjecture. We are showing you cause, evidence to the results of an angry man who has a long and violent regard for the police, who did not like that Det Jones entered and searched his apartment and killed her as a result. The time. The place. The end result, it all adds up and clearly points to Dallas Carter. I ask you to look at the facts, the wittiness statement, and bring this officer and her family the justice they deserve. Thank you.
Defense, it is now your turn to present your closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I appreciate your patience as I walk you through the facts, but I need to bring up one more crucial point that the prosecution has completely overlooked. I want to talk about the Chief of Justice here in Portofino. Now let me tell you a little bit about him. He's tall, just like the description of the person seen dumping the body. He's got tattoos, just like the description. And guess what? He drives a gray truck. So, if we're going to use the description of a tall man with tattoos driving a gray truck as the basis for identifying me, why did the prosecution fail to bring the Chief of Justice into the equation? Why didn't they mention any other potential suspects who fit this exact same description? I'm not saying that the Chief of Justice is a suspect, but I am saying that if we're going to go by these Dallas Carter vague descriptions alone, it's only fair to consider all possibilities, right? But that's not what happened here. They focused solely on me, and that's a problem. The truth is the prosecution focused only on me. They ignored anyone else who could have fit the profile. They didn't consider anyone else who could have been a suspect. They focused solely on me, and that's a problem. That's bias. That's a rush to judgment, and that's not fair. The prosecution's job is to seek the truth, not to find someone, anyone, to pin the crime on. But that's exactly what they've done here. They took the evidence, twisted it, and ignored anything that didn't fit their narrative. They focused on me because of my past, because of who I am, and because of where I've been. But that doesn't make me guilty, and it shouldn't make you convict me. You've heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. The prosecution has given you circumstantial evidence. They've pointed to DNA under Detective Jones's nails, a fingerprint on her neck, and a witness who claims to have seen me dumping a body. But each of these pieces of evidence has been challenged. Each of them has inconsistencies, contradictions, and gaps that the prosecution hasn't explained. They want you to convict based on assumptions and incomplete information. But that's not enough to take away my freedom. Now, you want to know where I was the night Detective Jones was murdered? I'll tell you. I was at home, with Damien and Xavier. We were together at my place watching a movie. But did the police ever come to me and ask where I was that night? Did they ask for my whereabouts or my side of the story? No, they didn't. They didn't care about the facts. They didn't try to piece together the timeline. They didn't ask me a single question. They just came to my house, threw me in handcuffs, and arrested me without so much as a conversation. No questions, no investigation, just a rush to judgment. They were so focused on making me the suspect that they didn't bother to do their job properly. If they had asked, I would have told them exactly where I was, but they didn't want to hear it. They were too eager to pin this on me. I'm asking you, the jury, to think about that. If the police truly believed I was guilty, why didn't they bother to investigate my whereabouts? Why didn't they ask me for the facts? Instead, they just arrested me. This wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was about finding someone to blame. The prosecution tried to tell you that I had a reason to kill Detective Jones, but the truth is, they can't prove that. They haven't given you a solid explanation as to why I would kill her. Was she a threat to me? Was there something I stood to gain by her death? No, there was nothing. If I had a motive, don't you think they would have shown you something that connected me to Detective Jones beyond just this vague description and circumstantial evidence? But they haven't. So, I ask you once more, look at the evidence carefully. Look at the facts. Don't let the prosecution's rush to judgment cloud your decision. Consider all the possibilities, not just the one they've presented to you. I stand here before you, accused of a crime I didn't commit. And I trust that when you consider all the evidence, the full picture, you'll see that the prosecution's case is flawed, incomplete, and filled with doubt. Thank you for your time and your attention. I trust you will find the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Members of the jury, you have now heard the closing statements from both the prosecution and the defense. It is your responsibility to consider the evidence presented, the testimony heard, and the arguments made. Your duty is to weigh the facts, set aside any personal emotions, and deliver a fair and just verdict based solely on the evidence in this case. You will now retire to deliberate. Remember, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution, and they must prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. If you find that any reasonable doubt exists, you must acquit. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
Please proceed with your verdict.
In this case, we find the defendant not guilty.
Very well. The jury has found the defendant, Mr. Dallas Carter, not guilty of the charges. This court will stand in recess.